The village of Nyama, nestled between rolling green hills and the vast expanse of the river, was once a place of prosperity. The fishermen who lived there thrived on the bounty of the waters, bringing in nets full of fish that fed not just their families but also the nearby markets. However, misfortune had befallen Nyama in recent years. The river, once teeming with life, had become eerily still. Fish were scarce, and the few that remained were weak and sickly. The villagers whispered among themselves, fearful that an ancient curse had returned. At the heart of the village lived Jabari, a fisherman whose luck had turned worse than most. He had once been among the finest, his nets always full, his family well fed. But misfortune followed him like a shadow. His wife had left, taking their child with her, and the respect he once commanded in the village had faded into pity and suspicion. He was a man weighed down by regret, a man who felt the heavy burden of his past mistakes pressing against his shoulders. The elders often spoke of the Whispering Waters, a place deep within the river where strange things were said to happen. It was said that those who ventured too far would hear voices calling their names, and some claimed to have seen golden scales flashing beneath the surface, vanishing before they could be caught. The legend told of a mystical fish that lived there, one that knew the hearts of men and spoke of things long buried. Jabari did not believe in such tales. To him, they were stories meant to keep children from wandering too far or to explain the misfortunes that had come upon the village. But desperation can make a man reckless. With every passing day, as his nets came up empty and his stomach remained hollow, he felt the weight of his helplessness grow. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Jabari sat by the shore, staring at the rippling waters. He clenched his fists, determined. He would go where no one else dared, past the safe fishing grounds, past the warnings of the elders. He would prove that the river still held treasures for those bold enough to claim them. If fortune no longer favored him, then he would seize it by force. As the villagers prepared for sleep, Jabari set out alone in his small wooden boat, the oars slicing through the darkening waters. The whispers of the river awaited him. The night air was thick with the scent of damp wood and river mist as Jabari rowed further into the unknown. The rhythmic splash of his oars was the only sound accompanying him, but his mind was not on the water. It was lost in the past, drowning in memories he had tried to forget. There was a time when Jabari had everything. He had been a respected fisherman, his boat always returning with the largest catches. His wife, Amani, had loved him deeply, and their young son had followed him everywhere, eager to learn the ways of the river. But pride is a dangerous thing. When the fish were plentiful, Jabari grew careless, taking more than he needed, ignoring the warnings of the elders who preached about balance and respect for the waters. Then came the year of the great drought. The river grew restless, and the fish became scarce. Many believed the river spirits were angry, punishing those who had taken too much. Jabari, desperate to maintain his standing, began fishing beyond the sacred boundaries, in waters said to belong to the spirits. He ignored the omens, the sudden storms, the disappearing boats, the whispers that carried across the waves when no one was there. One fateful night, he made his greatest mistake. A fellow fisherman, Kwame, had discovered Jabari's secret and threatened to tell the village. In a fit of anger and desperation, Jabari confronted him near the water's edge. No one knows exactly what happened that night, but by morning, Kwame was gone. His boat was found, shattered against the rocks, but his body was never recovered. Some believed he drowned, others whispered that the river spirits had claimed him, taking vengeance on Jabari's behalf. The village turned against him. Amani left, unable to bear the weight of the accusations. The elders refused to speak his name, and soon the once respected fisherman became nothing more than a shadow, a cautionary tale for others. He lived in silence, shunned by all, with nothing but the cold river as his companion. But time did not wash away his guilt. Every ripple in the water seemed to mock him. Every gust of wind carried the echoes of Kwame's name. He could not escape the weight of his past. And yet, something inside him refused to surrender. This night was his final chance. If he could return with a great catch, if he could prove that he was not cursed, perhaps the village would look upon him differently. Perhaps even the river itself would forgive him. As Jabari rode deeper into the forbidden waters, the sky above him darkened and the wind whispered through the reeds. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, whether it was the fortune he sought or the punishment he had long evaded. The river stretched before Jabari like a great, endless void, its surface black and still beneath the pale light of the moon. He had rowed farther than he had ever dared before, past the safe fishing grounds, past the familiar landmarks of the shore. The village was nothing but a faint glow in the distance now, and ahead of him lay the whispering waters, a place few had ever returned from. A strange stillness hung in the air. The usual chorus of frogs and crickets had fallen silent, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Even the wind, which had guided his boat so far, had died down, leaving only the rhythmic creaking of wood and the soft lapping of water against the hull. Jabari felt a chill creep along his spine, though the night was warm. He reached for his net, his fingers trembling slightly as he unravelled its heavy coils. He had done this 1,000 times before, but tonight, something felt different. The moon above flickered, as if a cloud had passed over it, except the sky was clear. The stars shimmered strangely, reflecting on the water like thousands of watching eyes. Jabari took a deep breath and cast his net into the water, its weighted edges sinking silently beneath the surface. He gripped the rope tightly, waiting. The seconds dragged on, stretching into minutes. He expected the usual tug of small fish darting against the mesh, but there was nothing. Just the eerie silence. Then, all at once, the net jerked violently downward. Jabari gasped, nearly losing his balance as the rope burned against his palms. The weight was immense, heavier than anything he had ever caught before. His heart pounded. This was no ordinary fish, no ordinary catch. With a grunt, he planted his feet against the wooden planks and pulled. The resistance was unreal, as if the river itself was fighting against him. The net twisted and writhed, straining under the weight of something alive, something powerful. Jabari gritted his teeth and pulled harder, the muscles in his arms screaming in protest. Inch by inch, the net rose from the depths. The water churned violently around it, glowing faintly as if touched by moonlight. Then he saw it, a flash of golden scales beneath the surface. Jabari's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary fish. It gleamed, even in the darkness, its form shifting like liquid gold. The river seemed to tremble as the creature was pulled from its depths, droplets of water cascading from its body like falling stars. And then, as he reached out to grasp the net, a voice, low and unnervingly human, broke the silence. "Jabari," it said. The fisherman's blood ran cold. The night had only just begun. Jabari's hands trembled as he pulled the net onto his boat, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The glow of the fish illuminated the deck, casting flickering golden light against the weathered wood. He had never seen anything like it. Its scales shimmered, not like ordinary fish but like molten metal, shifting between hues of gold and deep amber. Its large, dark eyes stared at him, not like prey, but like something that understood. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The river had gone eerily still, as if the world itself was watching. The only sound was Jabari's own pounding heartbeat. Then, as he reached forward to untangle the net, the fish spoke. "Jabari." The voice was not that of a beast. It was smooth, steady, human. A voice he did not recognize, yet somehow felt as if it had always known him. Jabari yanked his hand back as if burned, stumbling against the edge of his boat. His legs felt weak beneath him. His mind refused to make sense of what had just happened. Fish did not speak. It was impossible. But the golden creature tilted its head slightly, its mouth moving again, this time forming words more deliberate, more chilling. Do you think the river forgets? A deep shudder ran through Jabari's body. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat was dry, his breath shallow. The fish continued. Do you think that which is lost remains buried forever? Jabari's hands gripped the sides of the boat. He tried to push the voice away, to tell himself this was some fever dream, a trick of the night. But the words cut through him like a sharpened blade. Do you think Kwame has forgotten you? At the mention of the name, Jabari's world shattered. He staggered back, knocking over his basket of empty nets. Kwame. A name he had not spoken in years. A name that had haunted his dreams and shadowed his every waking moment. The night he was lost, the secrets that had remained buried beneath the water. His chest heaved, his hands clenched into fists. What are you? His voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. How do you know that name? The fish blinked, slowly, deliberately. The river knows. The river remembers. Jabari felt as if the air had been stolen from his lungs. His mind raced. He had spent years trying to outrun his past, convincing himself that the river had swallowed the truth along with Kwame's body. But now, here it was, spoken aloud, undeniable. The boat rocked gently beneath him, but Jabari felt as if the ground itself had vanished. He stared at the fish, and for the first time in his life, he understood the fear the elders spoke of. The fear of whispering waters, the fear of what the river could take, and the fear of what it might one day return. His grip on the net tightened. He had set out tonight to reclaim his fortune, to prove that his fate was his to control. But now, with this cursed creature lying before him, golden and gleaming like some ancient judge, he realized he had not come to claim the river's bounty. The river had called him here for judgment. Jabari's grip on the net tightened as the golden fish lay shimmering in the dim moonlight. His breath was shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs. The weight of its words still echoed in his mind, unraveling the fragile web of denial he had built over the years. Release me, and your sins will be forgiven. Keep me, and you will suffer. The voice was calm, yet heavy with certainty, like a decree that had already been written in the stars. Jabari's thoughts raced. If this creature truly held the power to cleanse his past, to lift the unseen curse that had clung to him for years, shouldn't he let it go? Shouldn't he grasp this one chance at redemption? But then he thought of the village, the hunger, the empty nets, the whispers of despair. A fish that spoke was unheard of, but a fish that spoke and gleamed like gold was something even greater. If he brought it back, the people would hail him as the fisherman who defied the curse. They would no longer look at him with suspicion, with the ghost of Kwame's name in their eyes. His lips parted, his voice rough. You expect me to believe that letting you go will erase my past? The fish's dark eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jabari felt as though it was seeing through him, peeling away every layer he had tried to hide beneath. The river does not forget, but it offers mercy to those who seek it. Jabari flinched. Mercy, a word he had not dared to dream of. Yet something deep inside him, the same voice that had pushed him to leave the safety of the shore tonight, whispered that mercy alone would not be enough. His gaze dropped to the fish's golden scales. This was a gift, a treasure beyond imagination. If he returned empty-handed, who would believe his tale? If he let it slip back into the depths, he would be left with nothing, no proof, no redemption, only silence. He clenched his jaw. Number he couldn't let it go. He wouldn't. You claim the river's curse is because of me, he muttered, his voice steadier now. Then let the river take me if it must. But you... His fingers curled around the net, pulling the fish deeper into the boat. You are coming with me. The moment the words left his mouth, the wind shifted. The stillness that had hung over the water broke, replaced by a deep, distant rumble. The waves around him stirred, lapping against the boat with a force they had not held before. The fish did not struggle, did not thrash, only watched. "You have made your choice, Jabari." A shiver crawled up his spine, but he ignored it. He reached for his oars and turned the boat back toward the shore. Whatever judgment the river had for him, he would face it on his own terms. The sky had begun to lighten by the time Jabari's boat reached the shore. A faint glow of dawn stretched over the horizon, but the air felt thick, as if the night had refused to release its hold. His arms ached from rowing, his mind swirling with the weight of what he had done. As he stepped onto the damp earth, the golden fish lay still in the net, its shimmering scales catching the first light of morning. It did not speak again, but its presence alone carried a silent, inescapable power. It wasn't long before the village stirred. A fisherman's return before sunrise was unusual, and the sight of Jabari standing at the river's edge, holding a fish unlike any they had ever seen, drew the people out of their huts one by one. At first, they came cautiously, curious, murmuring among themselves. Then, as more villagers arrived, the murmurs turned into a low roar of excitement, confusion, and fear. "Look at it!" one woman gasped. "A fish of gold!" "It's unnatural," an elder muttered. "A spirit of the river, no doubt." "Jabari has broken the curse," a young boy exclaimed, wide-eyed. "The fish are returning." Jabari stood still, gripping the net as the crowd pressed closer. Some villagers gazed at the fish in awe, their eyes filled with the promise of wealth and prosperity. Others stepped back in fear, whispering of omens and curses. Then, from the heart of the gathering, the village elder stepped forward. Mama Nyoka, a woman whose presence commanded respect without a single word. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fell upon the fish, then lifted to meet Jabari's. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. Jabari swallowed. He had faced storms at sea, fought against hunger and shame, but standing before Mama Nyoka with this forbidden creature in his hands, he felt like a child awaiting punishment. "I brought it back for the village," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. "We have been starving. The river has been empty for too long. This is a gift." Mama Nyoka's gaze did not waver. "A gift," she echoed. "Or a warning?" A hush fell over the crowd. She stepped closer, placing a wrinkled but steady hand on the net, where the fish's golden scales gleamed beneath the morning sun. "The river goddess watches," she murmured. "She does not give gifts without price." A ripple of unease passed through the villagers. Some cast wary glances at the river, as though expecting the waters to rise in fury. Others looked at Jabari, waiting for his response. His fingers tightened around the net. The fish had told him to let it go, but how could he? After all the years of hardship, after all the suffering, this was his chance to prove himself. The village held its breath, waiting for his answer. The village square had never been so tense. The golden fish lay at the center of it all, its shimmering scales reflecting the light of the morning sun. But its glow was no longer a thing of wonder. It was a thing of fear. The crowd murmured in uncertainty, their awe shifting into unease. The fish had remained silent since their arrival, but now, as Mama Nyoka removed her hand from the net, its voice returned. "The river does not forget," it said, its voice smooth yet chilling. "Nor does it keep its secrets forever." A ripple of gasps ran through the villagers. Jabari felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He had hoped to bring back fortune, but instead, he had brought back something much more dangerous. The fish's dark eyes swept over the crowd, as if peering into the souls of those gathered. Then, with a slow, deliberate tone, it spoke again. "Amani," it said, turning its gaze toward a woman in the crowd. "You speak of hunger, yet your own hands have stolen from your neighbor's storehouse in the night." Amani's eyes widened in horror. "Lies!" she shouted, stepping back. "This beast speaks lies!" But already the people were turning toward her, whispering, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Before the shock could settle, the fish spoke again. "Kofi," it called, locking onto an elderly man. "You mourn your brother's death. Yet it was you who sent him into the forest alone, knowing the beasts were waiting." A heavy silence followed. Kofi's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. Everyone had thought it was an accident. Now the truth had been laid bare. One by one, secrets unraveled, spilling into the open like a storm tearing through the village. Old betrayals, hidden crimes, whispered sins. The fish spoke them all. The tension turned to rage. Villagers began shouting, pointing fingers, accusations flying as years of buried resentments erupted into the open. Fights broke out, fists flew, old feuds reignited. Through the chaos, Jabari stood frozen, his breath shallow. He had brought this upon them. His greed, his refusal to heed the warning, had cursed them all. Then a voice, sharp with fury, cut through the noise. "You did this!" Jabari turned just in time to see Tunde, his childhood friend, stepping forward with rage in his eyes. "You wanted to be the hero," Tunde spat. "You wanted to make yourself great. And now you've torn us apart." Jabari took a step back, his pulse pounding. He had wanted to be seen as more than a cursed man. But now, the village would never forgive him. The golden fish lay still, watching. It had never needed to fight, never needed to raise its voice. It had simply spoken the truth, and the truth had destroyed them. That night, the village trembled. The sky, once calm, now churned with dark, writhing clouds, and the air smelled of rain and something older, something angry. The wind howled through the trees, bending them like frail reeds, and the river, once eerily still, had turned into a raging beast. Jabari stood outside his hut, his heart pounding as the first drops of rain hit the earth like tiny daggers. Then, the storm came. A brutal wind howled through the village, ripping thatched roofs from homes and sending fishing baskets tumbling through the mud. The river surged forward, spilling over its banks like a hungry mouth, devouring boats, dragging away nets, and pulling at the very foundation of the village. Jabari heard the screams before he saw the water rush through the lower huts, the villagers scrambling for higher ground, clutching their children and whatever they could carry. And then, through the chaos, came the whispers. Dark figures moved in the water. At first, they seemed like shadows cast by the lightning flashing across the sky, but then Jabari saw them, tall, twisting shapes rising from the waves. Their forms shifted like mist, yet their eyes burned with something ancient, something unforgiving. A voice, deep and resonant as the storm itself, echoed through the night. "You have taken what was not yours." Jabari's breath caught in his throat. He turned to see Mama Nyoka standing in the center of the village, her hands raised to the sky, her eyes filled with sorrow. "The river goddess is furious," she called out. "She demands justice." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the monstrous waves clawing at the land. Jabari stumbled backward. This was his fault. The fish had warned him, the river had whispered its warnings, and yet he had ignored them. The golden fish. Where was it? His eyes darted toward his hut, where he had hidden the creature in a clay pot filled with water. He knew what had to be done. His legs felt like lead as he forced himself to move, pushing against the screaming wind as the storm threatened to tear the village apart. He had thought he could control fate, that he could hold on to the fish and rewrite his story. But fate was no man's to control. He reached his hut, fumbling inside, his hands shaking as he grabbed the pot. The fish lay still, its golden scales dim, as if it too felt the weight of the river goddess's fury. Jabari knew now, only one thing could stop this disaster. He had to return the fish to the river. But would the goddess accept his offering, or had he already sealed his fate? Jabari clutched the clay pot to his chest, shielding it from the howling wind and the rain that lashed against his skin like tiny knives. The storm raged on, a living force of fury, as if the river itself was trying to pull him back, to stop him from undoing his mistake. The villagers cried out behind him, some huddling in fear, others watching him with wide, desperate eyes. They did not know what he intended to do, but he knew. His bare feet sank into the mud as he forced himself forward, toward the raging river. It was no longer the familiar water he had sailed on all his life. It was a beast, wild and vengeful, crashing against the land with monstrous waves. A particularly strong gust of wind nearly knocked him over, but he pushed forward, step by step, until he reached the riverbank. The fish stirred. Jabari looked down. The golden creature, so calm despite the chaos around it, lifted its gaze to him one last time. "Your past is forgiven," it said, its voice softer now, carrying none of the power that had once torn through the village. "But your future depends on your heart." Jabari's breath hitched. All his life, he had searched for redemption, for a way to escape the sins of his past, and now it was being offered to him. The river roared, the wind screamed, but his heart was steady. This was the moment of truth. Taking a deep breath, Jabari knelt at the water's edge. He hesitated only for a moment before tilting the pot and releasing the fish. The golden creature slipped into the waves without struggle, without hesitation. The moment it vanished beneath the surface, the storm changed. The wind that had screamed through the village fell silent. The monstrous waves that had surged toward the land stilled. The thick, suffocating darkness in the sky broke apart, revealing the first glimmers of dawn. Jabari's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths as he watched the once raging river return to peace, its surface now smooth as glass. Behind him, the villagers whispered, their fear slowly turning into awe. The destruction had stopped. The village had been spared. Mama Nyoka stepped forward, her wise eyes locking onto Jabari's. "It is done," she said. Jabari turned to face his people. He did not know if they would ever forgive him for what he had unleashed, but he had made his choice. And for the first time in years, he felt free. The sun rose gently over the village, casting golden light on the land that had been battered by the storm. The river, once furious, now lay calm and reflective, as if nothing had ever disturbed its sacred waters. The villagers emerged from their shelters, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also with something new, understanding. The storm had spared them, but not without a lesson. They had seen the power of the river, the wrath of the unseen, and the consequences of human greed. Without hesitation, they began to rebuild. Thatched roofs were repaired, boats were pulled from the mud, nets were rewoven. What had been lost in the chaos would be restored, not just in structure, but in spirit. No longer would they take the river's gifts for granted. Jabari watched in silence, standing at the river's edge. He was no longer the same man who had cast his net into forbidden waters. The village did not cast him out. Instead, they listened. In the evenings, as the fires burned low and the children gathered around, Jabari spoke, not as a fisherman seeking fortune, but as a storyteller. He told of the talking fish, of the river goddess, of the dangers of greed and the price of arrogance. His words were carried on the wind, passed from elder to child, woven into the fabric of the village's history. The legend of the talking fish of the whispering waters would never be forgotten. And so, the river flowed on, keeping its secrets in its depths. But the villagers never forgot the day one of those secrets rose to the surface. The final lesson remained. Some secrets are meant to be buried in the depths,